Hi YouTube community, my name is John. I wanted to take a few minutes and share my experience with tinnitus. I've had tinnitus semi-chronically for about the last 15 years. I've learned a few things along the way about just how to deal with it, how to cope with it, kind of how it works, what to expect, etc. Kind of how to manage it, maybe to a degree. I already made this video, but it ended up being just short of a half hour long, so I'm redoing it to try and be more succinct and to the point. Try not to ramble so much. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I actually have there's a few things that I do want to be sure to touch on. So I have a cheat sheet over here, kind of a makeshift outline that I'll probably be glancing at here and there just to make sure that I touch on certain things. But for a brief background, like I said, I've had it for, actually I should probably start by saying my ears in general are kind of messed up. My eustachian tubes are not angled the way that most people's are. So my ears don't drain the way they're supposed to, at least not as much as they're supposed to. So I've had, for that and probably other reasons, I've had ear infections almost my whole life. Long story short, I've had ear tubes for about 23 years, and I had permanent tubes put in about, I've lost track of time, several years ago, probably 7 or 8, 9 years ago. And so my ear, so I can hear much better now. My ears do drain, but they still get easily infected because of my eustachian tube problem. So that hasn't changed. It's just been the drainage and the hearing that have improved. But so I still get ear infections somewhat regularly. There's still certain things that trigger them that I try and avoid, but I still occasionally get them. And I think all of these ear problems throughout my whole life, including the unfortunately countless antibiotic courses that I've had to take, have kind of taken their toll. So, and I'll discuss all of these things over the next few minutes and in a little bit more depth. For me, the tinnitus really got bad around 15 years ago. And it happened kind of all of a sudden. Like I had it for a few seconds here and there before that, but it always went away after a few seconds. But this time it didn't. But it was kind of weird. There was no wasn't in a car accident. There wasn't a gun didn't go off next to my head. Nothing like that. No, nothing traumatic. It just kind of started. I think it was largely, again, like I said, because of the combination of the antibiotics and all the ear infections, this and that, kind of took their toll. But it started getting really bad all of a sudden about 15 years ago. And it's gotten much better since then, but it's taken time. And I remember the first couple years, probably added up to 2 or 3 years, were a little bit challenging, especially at first, like the first month or so while I was getting used to it. While I was getting used to the new volume of it, because it had gotten loud and it wasn't going away. So it took me a little bit of time to get used to that. One thing I will encourage anybody, if you're dealing with it right now, is one thing that helped me is having the mentality and perspective of, like, having a perspective of victory, for lack of a better way of saying it. Like knowing that this is a new difficulty and it's a new challenge, but I can handle it. And I'm going to make it through this. It may be tough. Don't know how long it's going to take. Don't know how bad it's going to get. But I've got this. I can handle it. And having that mentality was very helpful. And so I guess the next thing I'll talk about is, again, there's so many things I could say. I'm trying to be concise. So the next thing I guess I'll talk about is the masking methods that I've found. Ultimately, when it comes to masking it, for me, it has ultimately come down to finding distractions, which manifest in different ways depending on the time of day, what I'm doing. During the day, if I notice it or if it gets loud, I just try and focus on whatever it is that I'm doing. And usually if I focus on something else, if I don't focus on the ringing, then it either goes away or I don't notice it as much, or it quiets down. Either way, it gets better. And which makes sense, because that's kind of in general how the brain works. If we focus on a problem, then that's what we're focusing on, and the problem maybe gets worse. But if we focus maybe on if we distract ourselves, or if we focus on finding the solution instead of focusing on the problem, then the problem becomes smaller and smaller, may even go away. So having the right perspective and the right focus has helped tremendously. So that's for, like, during the day, that's what I'd suggest, is just focus on whatever you're doing. During the night, same thing, but just in a different way. What I've found is finding a way to distract myself at night works as well. Be that thinking about something, or turning on masking music like white noise or some actual music, whatever your choice of music is. Who cares? Techno, country, R&B, whatever, heavy metal, whatever helps you sleep, whatever helps to distract you. And I found that worked really well for me. And I find, for me at least, I remember trying this. There may be like a learning curve there. You might try taking a few days and trying different things, seeing what works. I know there's some smartphone or device-based apps that like sound machine kind of apps. I think one that I found that worked well, the one that worked best for me, I think, was a white noise. You can get variations of white noise too. Like there's pink noise, I think brown noise, the white noise. I forget, there's a couple others, I think, and they all sound a little bit different. I think for me, some of them worked better than others. I don't remember which ones. But I would suggest trying out white noise. That worked best for me, I think, because it did a good job of masking the tinnitus, and masking meaning covering it up. It did a good job of masking the tinnitus, and it also, the noise itself, the white noise, was like comforting. Like it wasn't an annoying noise. It was comforting and soothing, and I could fall asleep to it because it just becomes background noise. One thing I would like to suggest, regardless of what method you use to mask it, I would like to suggest that when you're turning up or down the volume, I would suggest setting the volume at a level where it's loud enough to mask it 90% or so. Meaning that, it's almost completely masked, but you can still hear the ringing a little bit. The reason I say that is because I haven't studied this. I don't have necessarily conclusive evidence of this, but the more we're exposed to something like this, like tinnitus, the more quickly we get used to it. Like with any new thing, the more you expose yourself to new things, the more quickly you get used to them. And I believe that this was key for me when I would mask it, but not completely, because then it was masked enough that it wasn't annoying anymore, but I could still hear it a little bit, so I got used to hearing it. And I think that has been instrumental in teaching my brain to be okay with it and to not really be annoyed by it. It doesn't completely take away the annoyance, because it's still there, and sometimes it's still there, and it's still sometimes a little bit annoying, but it's not that bad. Like you get used to it, and you learn to ignore it, really. So those are the things that I would try. And even if you don't use one of those methods, just find something to distract yourself. I know there was one morning or in the middle of the night, basically, a while ago, where I woke up and my ears were screaming. I think I was on antibiotics at the time. I don't remember for sure. I believe I was. But I remember woke up and they were screaming. My ears were screaming. And enough that it was challenging to get back to sleep. So I got up and just started writing, grabbed a pen and paper and just started writing for a few minutes. I think I wrote with my non-dominant hand as well, just so I had to focus even more on it. On the writing. Did that for probably 10 or 15 minutes, and at that point I had distracted myself for long enough that the ringing had calmed down and quieted down significantly, to the point where I was able to go back to bed and within a few minutes fall back asleep. I still had the white noise or music or whatever I was using at the time. I still had that on in the background, but it was calmed down enough that I could relax, and the anxiety went away. And I was able to fall back asleep. So you may have different situations like that where you have to adapt to the situation. But like I said, ultimately it comes down to distracting yourself. I want to also take a few minutes to discuss my experiences with drugs, and more specifically, I should say, my experience with antibiotics, for like the ones I've taken for ear infections. Throughout my life, I've used, I think I started with amoxicillin, and then eventually after that stopped working, because I've used them a lot, again, unfortunately, throughout my life. I started with amoxicillin, eventually switched to Augmentin, which is a combination of, I believe, amoxicillin and I think it's clavulanic acid. It's basically just like amoxicillin on steroids. Used that for a while until that became less effective. At which point, long story short, at one point I had an infection that I waited too long to see the doctor about, and he prescribed me the Augmentin didn't work in that case, so he gave me ciprofloxacin, which worked, but it did a number on my ears. My ears were screaming, like the tinnitus was super loud for an uncomfortably long period of time. I think it took 2 to 3 years for my ears to calm down after that. Maybe not that long, but I believe it was at least a year or two, a year and a half. I think closer to 2, maybe even 3 years. That was a while ago, so I don't remember for sure. But I remember for quite a while after that, at least initially, my ears were screaming, and it took a long time for them to quiet down. And so after that, I kind of told myself that if at all possible, as much as possible, I would be avoiding ciprofloxacin if I was able to. And the next time I had an ear infection after that, I told my doctor about that situation and my experience, and that I wanted to try something else, and he prescribed to me clindamycin, which worked well as well. It took care of the infection, but clindamycin has its own set of, relatively nasty potential side effects. Probably numerous side effects. I'm only aware of a couple of them, but they're big for me at least. They're big enough of a deal and of a risk that I didn't want to use it more than necessary. I think I've used 2 or 3, for sure 2, maybe 3 rounds or courses of clindamycin, and then I decided that I didn't want to use it anymore if possible, just because I wanted to protect my overall health and protect my gut and all that. So after using clindamycin a couple rounds, the next time I had an ear infection after that, I communicated my concerns to my doctor, and my doctor started giving me eardrops instead of oral antibiotics. And the eardrops that I was given were a combination of ofloxacin and I may pronounce this wrong or get it wrong. I believe it's dexamethasone. Something like that. Dexamethasone, I believe what it is. I think both are generic. One of them is an antibiotic. One of them is an anti-inflammatory. Both are generic, just because I think the non-generic, the name brand version is Ciprodex, which is, same thing essentially, if I remember correctly, but it's more expensive. So I went with the less expensive generic versions that basically do the same thing. And those have worked well the last couple of ear infections I've had, because I told my doctor I didn't, if at all possible, I wanted to explore other non-pill antibiotics, non-oral antibiotics. So we started exploring different forms of ear drops, and so far those two, the ofloxacin combined with dexamethasone, have been helpful, and they've worked. I think I forgot to say this. I should point out that the clindamycin, which was the second to last one that I took, as well as these most recent eardrops, those have both been okay with my tinnitus. They have had very little, if any, effect on the tinnitus. Maybe a little bit of extra ringing, but not much. Nothing compared to the ciprofloxacin that I took a while back, where it just where my ears started just ringing super loud. It has not been like that at all. Maybe a little bit of extra ringing, but it's been very manageable, and it's almost like it hasn't affected it at all. I forget if I said this. I've been careful lately to request drugs that are not ototoxic, because ototoxic drugs, from what I understand, can more easily mess with your hearing mechanisms. And they're more likely to cause tinnitus. So again, talk with your doctor. I'm not promoting any of these drugs. These have just been my experience and what has worked for me and what my experience has been with each of these drugs. So I'm not trying to say use them, not trying to say don't use them. Just, of course, talk to your doctor, and, your doctor, of course, will or should, in theory, prescribe what they think is best for you in your situation. For me and my situation, those ones I've mentioned, those are the ones that my doctor thought would work best for my situation. So that's been my experience with antibiotics. Of course, use them at your own risk. Take all the necessary precautions to avoid or minimize the other side effects. Know what you're getting into. Make sure you talk to your doctor about what exactly you're getting into when you're using each of these medications. Just for, dare I say, obvious reasons, just to take care of yourself. So that's kind of the summary of what I wanted to say about the antibiotics, the use of antibiotics. One thing, again, to keep in mind is no matter how you approach this, try and keep in mind that over time, your brain should get used to it. It may take some time. For me, it was an up and down thing for me because it was loud at first, 15 years ago when it started, and then it quieted down, fairly significantly. And then I was given that new antibiotic, the ciprofloxacin, which that fired it right back up again for a while. So it's been an up and down for me, but overall, it's like my ears have calmed down significantly to the point where, like right now, listening forward right now, I don't even really hear the ringing. If I do, it's so small that it's just bare. For all intents and purposes, I hear no ringing right now, even when I listen for it, and even less so when I'm not listening to it, when I'm just focused on whatever I'm doing. So your brain should habituate over time. You should get used to it, even if it, dare I say, doesn't go away. It should become easier and easier to deal with. And along those same lines, I guess I kind of want to wrap this video up with some encouragement. And I want to say that I want to encourage people to not to give up. Even especially during those times when, if you do have those times, which hopefully you won't, but if you do, when it's really challenging and it's kind of driving you crazy. And I remember when I first, the first couple weeks that I had it, again, years ago. I remember there was a couple times where I was still used to it, or I was still getting used to it. Like I didn't know what to do with it or how it worked, how to confront it, how to deal with it. So I remember making one night I made a phone call to my local hospital, to the nurses line. They have a free nurses line you can call to get just general advice and get advice on next steps. Called them to tell them what was going on. They couldn't really do anything aside from just encourage me and say, they basically told me, they gave me just kind of basic advice on nutrition, getting rest, avoiding or minimizing alcohol, caffeine, etc. Having a good diet, getting rest and exercise, just kind of basic, dare I say, common sense lifestyle suggestions and whatnot. But they weren't able to say, hey, this is how long it'll last. Here's how to fix it, because so much of that is unknown. So they couldn't really say that. So I remember that was actually when I had that call, it was disappointing, but it was also, in a way, like it was almost empowering in a very ironic sense, because, and it's easy for me to see this in hindsight and to say this in hindsight, but I feel like it was almost empowering because I was put into a situation where I had to confront a challenge that I didn't know how to confront, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how long it would last. And so I had to rely on a combination of my own willpower, perhaps, combined with the grace of God, combined with prayer or whatever coping mechanism you use to learn to deal with this thing. That was maybe the hardest part of this whole thing. And there was a bit of a learning curve there. But like I said, I think I said that I've always been able to fall asleep. There was never been a night where I couldn't sleep, but it just did take a little bit of time to learn to deal with it. But don't give up, because that was the key thing for me. Because I remember having the mentality, I'm not going to give up. This may be a challenge. There may be some difficult days and nights, but I've got this. I can handle this, and I'm gonna grow from it, and I'll be a bigger and stronger person afterwards. And God willing, I'll be able to help other people who are maybe struggling or dealing with this same thing. Hopefully, I'll be able to help them. I'm gonna leave the comment section open. Go ahead if anybody has any questions about my experience, or anyone needs help. Please leave a comment. That's been my main reason for this video, is to try and help people. And I I want to do that however I can, really. Whether that means, a phone call or video, whatever. I want to be able to help people for all intents and purposes in any way that I reasonably can. So if anyone needs help or needs suggestions or has a question, please leave a comment in the comment section. And I hope this video has been helpful and encouraging. That's been my main goal, is to encourage people. Again, don't give up. You can take this. You can confront this thing, and you can learn to deal with it. And you'll become a stronger person as you learn to deal with it. And seek out advice from your physician, maybe from a counselor if you need to. But hang in there and don't give up. All right. Thank you for your time. I hope this has been helpful. Take care. God bless.